Mayor Walsh recently issued the first annual report on a program to increase safety in the streets of Boston. That goes for all modes of travel, whether in cars, on bikes, or on foot. The project was put together by the Boston Transportation Department and the Vision Zero Task Force. To explain the safety problems and Vision Zero strategies is our guest from the Transportation Department, a planner and project manager, Charlotte Fleetwood. Thank you very much for being with us, Charlotte.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, talk about with this definition of Vision Zero. This sounds really ambitious.
Yes, it is, but the idea is we want to try to get to zero traffic deaths in the city. And we know from the experience in other cities, in Sweden and in New York City and in San Francisco, having a program can really make a difference. And so it's not going to happen overnight, but we're starting it now, and hopefully in several years we'll get there, if not sooner.
Well, one of the things you're doing in this report is taking your first read on how things stand right now, because 1 year into the program, we don't know much yet about the progress, but we do know for the past calendar year a significant increase in injuries and even fatalities, I think, involving pedestrians.
Yes, it's a huge problem, and it's a problem around the country, and we don't know exactly what's causing it, but I think people suspect that it has to do with distracted driving and perhaps distracted walking as well. But the combination of those two things, and certainly, we know speeding is often a factor in any crash, and that's one of the reasons why we are really focusing on two things. Trying to reduce speeds so that people have more of a chance of seeing someone who steps out into the street, and so that they're more able to quickly stop if they do see somebody. And if they do hit somebody, then the harm would be less. So that's one of the major things. And then also, seeing what we can do about distracted driving. And that's a really challenging situation. But as you may have seen in the report, we have some ideas. We've been doing the Boston Safest Driver is one way to try to get at that. An app it's like a game, and you get a score every time you drive, and if you use your phone while you're driving, your score goes down. And people's natural tendency to want to do well in games, especially in this city, we've seen when people start using the app, they actually do improve in terms of less distracted driving, less speeding, and less of the dangerous behaviors that we see.
In the past year, more than 400 people were injured on bikes, but I also noticed that the figure has gone down from what it had been in the years before that.
Yes, and we're happy to see that. There was a report by the Harvard School of Public Health that recently came out, and it looks like the crash rates for cyclists are going down. But nevertheless, cyclists are extremely vulnerable on the roads, in Boston and anywhere. So while we're happy to see the crash rates go down, we want to do an even better job.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Charlotte Fleetwood from the Boston Transportation Department. Charlotte, talk about another trend you got to contend with here, is that there are clusters of I guess, accidents in the city. Rather than going through a whole laundry list, talk about what makes a cluster bad.
Well, one thing I want to mention is we try, as part of Vision Zero, to not use the word accident, because an accident makes it sound like it's inevitable and not preventable. So we try to stay away from that word and use the word crash. And people will use the word accident accidentally quite a few times. But so crash clusters happen, for a variety of reasons. I mean, if you look at where the bicyclist crash clusters happen, in some cases it has to do with railroad or T-tracks in the roadway, we believe, because we are seeing crash clusters at Huntington and South Huntington and in Cleveland Circle. For motorists and pedestrians, sometimes you have streets that come together at odd angles, and so that can create issues of unpredictability or potentially speeding. So that's another reason why you see some crash. Sometimes you just have a huge intersection. Mass Avenue and Melnia Cass Boulevard is just enormous, and it has huge amounts of traffic, many pedestrians, and that's another location where we see a crash cluster.
Well, one of the things that the city has done to reduce the odds of crashes is you have some streets where you put a lot of things to calm the traffic. Explain how those work.
So people will naturally slow down if the travel lanes are narrower, or if there's something in the roadway that they need to avoid. So when we put flex posts in the street to demarcate a bicycle lane, it does several things. So it prevents people from driving in the bike lane, which is a huge benefit, but it also narrows the feel of the street, so people will just naturally slow down. So that's a technique that's proven to be very effective, and we'll probably be doing quite a bit more of that.
Of course, another thing you've done is on Mass Ave, you have more protection for bicyclists now too.
Yes, so we swapped the bike lane and the parking lane. So now you have the sidewalk and the curb, the bike lane, 3-foot buffer with flex posts, and then the travel lane. So that means that bicyclists are no longer at risk for dooring, which is one of the major sources of bicycle crashes. So it's when somebody in a parked car opens up a car door and while a bicyclist is going by, and the bicyclist then can get thrown into the street, and it's a very hazardous situation. So
I know you mentioned that we now have a sort of a uniform default speed limit that's lower than it used to be, but you also know areas in the city where there's a lot of speeding, and I think one of the problem areas that we've identified is Beacon Street. And talk about what you've done to sort of make sure that changes.
So there's a design that's in the works for Beacon Street. And I think one of the reasons that people speed is maybe because the street is so wide, and there does seem to be excess capacity on the street. So when the street is wide and it's straight for a long distance, people are more likely to just hit the gas and go. So we're looking at options for that. You know, maybe we'll take some of that width and repurpose it for a protected bike lane. You know, whatever we do, we want to work very closely with the community, but I do think the width of the roadway is an issue.
Well, I do a lot of walking, and I know one of the challenges in the city sometimes when you're crossing a big intersection is you feel like you're almost stealing a base, and the city's trying to shorten some of those crossing trajectories. Audubon Circle, I think, is one example where you're going to be doing that.
Yeah, so we had slip lanes there and islands, and what we've done is we've taken the islands and sort of pushed them into the sidewalk to create plazas on the four corners, but it means that now the pedestrian has a shorter distance to cross instead of having to go across the slip lane and then, you know, more lanes of travel. It's just one direct shot across. But there's also a traffic island there, and traffic islands are another way to break up a crossing. It helps. I mean, in that situation, you've got a traffic signal, so you should be able to go safely across without stopping. But at an unsignalized intersection, if you have a traffic island, it really helps because you can watch for cars in one direction, you know, get safely to the middle, and then watch for cars in the other direction instead of having to navigate both directions at once.
We should mention if people want to see the full report, get some more details, you've got a place online where they can do that?
Yes, we have a Vision Zero website, so it's visionzeroboston.org.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Charlotte Fleetwood from the Boston Transportation Department.